Thank you, Alan. Faculty and staff colleagues, family and friends, graduates of 2016, it is such an honor and a pleasure to be standing right here this morning. I look around this room and I see people who I know must be grandparents. And if you're out there, I have to say that among the many people who shaped my interest in nature and in the environment, my maternal grandparents really stand out. During our preteen years, my brother and I spent a month each summer with Gramps and Grandma Brennan on their small farm near Olympia, Washington. And those visits always included camping and lots of hikes in various Pacific Northwest locations. And as I was preparing this talk, one of those hikes kept surfacing in my memory. I was 10 or 11 years old, and Gramps and I were standing on top of Rock Candy Mountain in the Capitol State Forest, just a bit south of Olympia. And I can tell you the vista was not uplifting. There seemed to be nothing but clear-cut forest between us and the town of Tacoma, 40 miles out in the distance. The landscape was a thicket of vines and shrubby alders, scarred with logging roads, skid trails, and erosion gullies. Minutes before, Gramps had been in a jovial and kidding mood. But as we looked across this devastation, his voice was filled with something close to remorse. I first came here during the Depression, working with the Civilian Conservation Corps forestry crew, he said. There was nothing but old-growth forest as far as the eye could see, and we said that we never could and never would cut it all. What were we thinking? What were we thinking? In the nearly 60 years since that day, I've heard those four words repeated in the context of so many of our human interactions with the environment. I was born into a world of 2.5 billion souls, and in the 70 years since, our numbers have nearly tripled. That growth in our numbers has been facilitated by technologies that have improved overall human wealth and well-being, although much more so for some than for others. And the environmental cost of this development has, in so many places and in so many realms, been staggering. Each year, more than 2 million of us die prematurely as a direct consequence of the pollutants that our technologies put into the air that we breathe. We now utilize, we dam, divert, pump, irrigate with over a third of the water that flows on Earth's surface, and over half of us bathe in or drink water that does not meet even the most minimal sanitation standards. The growth in our numbers and improvement in our well-being has largely been fueled by various forms of high-energy carbon captured in ecosystems millions of years ago. And burning those fossil fuels has greatly increased atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide and methane, gases that are warming our atmosphere and acidifying our oceans. And none of Earth's ecosystems escapes our influence. In our management and interactions of these ecosystems, Aldo Leopold once likened us to tinkerers, fiddling with complex machines that we do not even remotely understand. And he warned that the first precaution of intelligent tinkering is don't throw away the pieces. And yet, we have done just that. Because of a welter of human impacts, Earth is losing species at a rate unmatched since the celestial catastrophe that ended the age of the dinosaurs. What were we thinking? We're apt to blame our ignorance for the consequences of our actions. If we had only known more, we would have done things differently. But I believe the problem is more about our hubris than our ignorance. In his essay on the damned human race, Mark Twain rightly summed this up. It's not what you don't know that'll hurt you, he said. It's what you know for certain that just ain't true. Twain went on to argue that our most damning certainty is our understanding of our relationship to nature. He likened the span of time that Earth has supported life in its various forms to the Eiffel Tower. And our share of that time, he said, is equivalent to the skin of paint on its pinnacle knob. And he lamented that the vast majority of us are all too certain that that knob's veneer is the sole reason for the existence of the entire tower. So at this moment, I think I know how my grandfather felt. Here we are on the mountaintop, surveying the impacts of our multitudinous actions and wondering what we're doing in a handbasket. And here you are, about to be anointed with your various degrees and charged with nothing less than to pull us back from that abyss. For the sake of Earth's air, water, climate, ecosystems, for our sake, we're counting on you. And I have every reason to be hopeful. So let me leave you with that thought for a moment while I change directions a bit. As Dean Townsend said, this year we're celebrating the silver anniversary of the inauguration of Duke School of the Environment, the Nicholas School of the Environment. Why a new school? What were we thinking? After all, Duke had a remarkable record of environmental research and teaching dating back to the 1920s and 30s. It included distinguished ecology programs in botany and zoology, among the first in the nation. In 1938, it established one of the nation's premier forestry schools that would then become the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And in that same year, the Duke University Marine Laboratory near Beaufort opened its doors for research and education dedicated to understanding our coastal and ocean environments and the creatures that dwell in them. So in 1991, our inaugural year, Duke was already distinguished among its peer institutions by its many forms of environmental study. They included environmental engineering, studies of coastlines, oceanography, hydrology, environmental health, toxicology, and distinguished programs in environmental economics and policy, just to name a few. So what was the problem? Now, the problem was that these resources were distributed among many departments and schools, and in many ways isolated from one another. To put it another way, decades of university development and evolution had ideally prepared us to ask questions, but not ideally positioned us to solve problems. Question answering is typically, though I should say not always, a disciplinary pursuit focused around specific methodologies that define, for example, departments like chemistry, biology, economics, or political science. Problem solving, and particularly environmental problem solving, is inherently interdisciplinary. It requires a knowledge of how the world works, that is, the knowledge vested in the natural science disciplines. It requires knowledge about how 7+ billion of us human racers interact with the world and with each other, the social science and humanities. It requires an understanding of how best to apply such knowledge that has long been vested in professional programs in engineering or in management or in medicine. Most of all, it requires communication and collaboration among these disciplines. So, in their wisdom, our Board of Trustees recommended that effective July 1st, 1991, Duke should have a School of the Environment, and the scholarly resources of the Marine Laboratory, the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and a few years later, its Geology Department should be its foundation. Its goals were broadly stated. The school should first and foremost be a nexus for research and education in environmental problem solving. It was not intended that the new school would do away with traditional disciplines, rather that it would make the boundaries between them much more permeable, and it would unite basic and applied research and education. And importantly, the school was charged with scaling up Duke's research and education programs to match the scale of environmental challenges that we faced then and continue to face. Selecting the name School of the Environment for this new enterprise was a matter of considerable discussion, I can tell you. No other school or department in the country yet bore such a name. Some felt it was too all-encompassing, some felt it was too trendy or cheeky. But we all knew it was audacious. And consciously or unconsciously, I think most of us felt that such audacity was important to signal a new beginning and a firm commitment by the entire university to live up to the school's founding expectations. I am so grateful and honored to have been dean at that beginning, but I know full well that the credit for the achievements of the past 25 years is owed to scores of leaders, staff, faculty, students, alumni, and so many wonderful friends. And those achievements are many. 25 years ago, our physical facilities here in Durham and in Beaufort were, shall we say, humble. Today, the school inhabits 2 beautiful buildings in Durham and has new buildings and upgraded classrooms and laboratories on its Beaufort campus. Over these 25 years, our faculty has more than doubled in size and now represents a diversity of disciplines that I could hardly have imagined when I occupied the dean's office. They include physical and biological scientists, engineers, social scientists, problem solvers with a diversity of interests that give us every right to call ourselves the school of the environment. We are solving urgent and compelling environmental problems, and here are just a few examples. Through our integrated toxicology and environmental health program, the Superfund Research Center, and Duke's Global Health Initiative, Nicholas School faculty and students are collaborating with other Duke colleagues to find solutions to environmental challenges as diverse as the pollutants in our water, toxic chemicals in our furniture and clothing, and the spread of mosquito-borne diseases such as malaria and Zika. Collaborations through our Center for Global Change and programs in the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions are not only exploring opportunities to mitigate increasing emissions of heat-trapping gases and the consequential global warming, but also finding win-win opportunities to adapt to their likely consequences. Through programs and partnerships on both our Durham and Beaufort campuses, our faculty and students are working with public agencies and a host of organizations to stem the loss of species and their habitats on the lands and in the oceans. But I've often been asked what it is I believe to be our most important accomplishment. And without hesitation, I say it's you. It's the almost 200 of you seated in these front rows, and the thousands who have preceded you and will follow in your footsteps. In a few moments, we will celebrate your accomplishments as we recite the titles of your master's projects and your dissertations. I'm in awe not only of the depth and quality of your work, but also of its remarkable diversity. I'm equally proud of the thousands of our alumni in positions in public, private, and not-for-profit sectors who are making a genuine difference in the world. We do have much to celebrate in this silver year, but we should temper that celebration with humility. The Nick School is definitely a work in progress, and we have much yet to do. The Nicholas School's physical and financial resources have grown considerably, but important resource challenges remain. We are more diverse in terms of gender, in terms of race and nationality than we were 25 years ago. But we have much more work to do to ensure that the diversity of our faculty and our student body truly represents the diversity of humanity that we're pledged to serve. We have blurred many of the sharp-line boundaries that divide us, but we have much to do to make the intersections among disciplines, between teaching and research, between basic and applied scholarship, truly seamless. As we move forward, we should most of all build on the history that precedes us, but we should never allow ourselves to be constrained by that history. So I'd like to return a bit to my original theme. When I was 50 and Gramps was nearing 90, we returned to Rock Candy Mountain. Ecological succession had restored for us to much of the landscape, and we were surrounded by 2-foot diameter Douglas firs and yellow cedars. Many coming to this spot might suggest that these forests were actually primeval. Of course, they weren't. Nevertheless, the land had recovered some measure of its primeval diversity, and many of its ecosystem services had been restored. And I should add that that restoration was facilitated by the actions of committed environmental professionals from all sectors, folks like you. I don't say this to encourage naive optimism, but we do have many reasons to be hopeful about the future. Given time and the willingness to translate our hopes into actions, Earth's ecosystems can recover from some of our worst insults. And all of this brings me back again to you. Over these 2 years, and I should say many more for you PhDs, the faculty and staff of the Nicholas School have worked to provide you with state-of-the-art knowledge and skills. It's now critical that you apply that knowledge and those skills with confidence. But beware of the certainty about which you know. About that which you know, excuse me. It is our best understanding of how the world works, but that knowledge and understanding is always subject to change. There is nothing, I repeat, nothing that we know for certain. I can assure you, probably sooner than later, you will look back on many of your most closely held certainties and ask, what was I thinking? But you can't let that uncertainty paralyze you. Despite the terminology in many environmental impact analyses, there is no such thing as the no action alternative. Deliberate action is in fact essential. In our world of rapid environmental change, decisions to do nothing have powerful and usually negative consequences. But our actions should be energized with hope, and they should also be tempered with humility about what it is we actually know, and with a willingness to test our most closely held beliefs. After these years of hard work, you are all justified in feeling that the end is in sight. But we don't call this the finale, Rather, it's a commencement. And I think that's really a wise choice of words. This moment is the end of nothing. It's the beginning of everything. My greatest hope is that, in addition to knowledge, we have encouraged in you humility and curiosity that will multiply and, yes, modify that knowledge many times over. You are indeed intelligent tinkers, but with all due respect to Aldo Leopold, let your first precautions be humility and hope. Thank you.